Okay, let's try to continue to make sense of how we conceive of moral thought and what we mean by morality in general. I think it's a difficult topic and it will get much more confusing. What we did so far is simply point out that without any reference to supernatural beings, statements about morality and statements like you should do something can be meaningful as soon as you introduce the following elements. A purely third person world in which there are no experiences. In such a world, it wouldn't make sense to say I should do or something should be the case. Should statements just don't make sense at all. Such statements become meaningful the moment you introduce the notion of first person reality, so that there are experiences, this world contains experiences in it, and not only are there experiences, but they're someone's experiences, or those experiences are given to someone. In other words, there's this relationship between someone wanting to have an experience and not wanting to have an experience. This seems to be a very basic way of how we speak about consciousness. And if we did away with that, if we, for example, did away with what we usually call the subject of experience and talked only of experiences, we would lose a very central characteristic, which is namely experiences come in an evaluative relationship. And this even with the most simple and even pre-verbal experiences that you can have. They come in the form of you want to have them or you don't want to have them. And this is something that's visible in children, it's something that's visible in animals, again in pre-verbal beings who have not been indoctrinated to think in a specific way about reality. They already stand in a certain relational way towards those experiences. They're not just experiencing, but they're experiencing something to be painful to them. It's different than just saying, oh, there is pain. There is the presence of pain. Pain is painful to someone. It's not painful to itself. It doesn't even, verbally, it doesn't really make sense. You couldn't even express the evaluative relationship if we just had experiences and nothing else in this world. Because to whom would it make a difference whether you are in a state of pain or not? If there is no subject of experience, this notion becomes meaningless. Then a being would just remain in a state of pain and that's it. Right? This is not how experience feels like. Experience, again, it's not only experiences that we have, but we feel a relationship towards those experiences, a pushing away or a striving towards them. And it's not particularly metaphysical, I don't think even controversial. It's an attempt to describe something that's already there, visible and obvious to each and every one of us. Right? To have a language, a meaningful way of speaking about a very, very basic reality that is very foundational. But that reality, as simple as it might be, is something that introduces a meaningful way of using the term should or ought to do something, right? In this world, suddenly statements like you ought to do something are meaningful. And all they mean in this context is what I should do is actually what the other organism or being wants me to do. Wantings and obligations here basically coincide. As a German philosopher, Günther Buck once put it, the interests of the other, basically here coincide in being the obligations for me, right? Where you have a facing of two perspectives. Somebody else's interests literally become my should. And there's nothing, so far we have introduced nothing beyond that for should to have a meaning beyond the meaning of, hey, what I should do is equally of asking, what do you want? It's the same thing. When I'm asking for what I should do, I'm basically asking for what the other one wants me to do. Wantings here generate, if you want, obligations. So the moment an organism wants something, the moment the child doesn't want to be hit in the face, you shouldn't hit the child in the face. I know this is a very revolutionary thought. People never thought about this for thousands of years, and I'm serious about this. The idea that someone's interests are enough to legitimize someone else's obligations, it's a pretty young idea. It's just barely a few hundred years old. And yet think about it. I mean, it's so common sense to everybody. Why don't you hit someone? Why don't you do certain things upon other beings? Well, because they don't want that to happen to them. Their wantings are a relevant factor in defining what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. So it's not like in the Middle Ages, for example, where literally the experience of pain was not regarded as something that is inherently bad. Because if your experience of pain was something that was putting into place the cosmic order, if it was a form of redemption, if you want, it could actually be publicly displayed, and your personal suffering was perfectly fine because it was reconstituting the global cosmic order. This is a pre-modern understanding of morality. It's a pre-modern understanding insofar as, first of all, not all wantings, not all subject of experience are equal, right? There are subject of experience which are closer to God and others which are further removed away from God. They're not all equal, and particularly they are not self-standing. They are not ends in themselves, but they are only to be regarded as ends for within a bigger order in which they become meaningful. This is entirely foreign to us as an idea. If a being is in pain, that pain tells you something about reality, and it's just as real as reality can get. And not responding to that pain is something that is inherently calling upon you in an equal manner to be taken seriously. I think to pretty much everybody, including those who believe in religious definitions of morality, doesn't seem intuitively right. So if an animal cries out in pain, the intuitive reaction to this is usually take the first person demands put upon you seriously and respond to it. Just as when third person reality calls you and the rock is moving towards you, you move aside, right? It's very similar actually in principle. The way we are intrinsically interested in third person reality is just similar to the way we're intrinsically interested in first person reality. But in both cases, it takes recognition. You have to look into third person reality, start making sense of it to be interested in it. Same thing with first person reality. When you look at it, when you start recognizing it, you intrinsically show an interest in responding to it. And this is a way in which we can meaningfully define ought in this world, to have a meaningful sense. Now, the trouble with this is not that we don't have an ought that is strong enough, right? That you need some kind of punishment, otherwise something would be missing and people just wouldn't do things. The reality of it is actually quite the opposite. And that's a typical problem of modernity. That's a world which is morally far too demanding. A world in which every wanting surrounding you, every subject of experience that cries out at you and demands attention, actually has an obligation, but by its wantings, already created an obligation upon you to listen to it and take it seriously. This is not a world in which a normal human conscious agent could actually meaningfully move without going insane. This is not a world in which you could move and just ignore, right, first person demands. Because again, every first person demand is equally valid. Every first person demand is objectively there. We can objectively know about first person reality and equally binding to you as an agent. And this is, by the way, not just a theory, but if you think about it, this is exactly what has happened in the past few hundred years, where we have defined morality in terms of interests and recognition of those interests. If somebody wants ice cream, that wanting of ice cream becomes your moral obligation. So if you break against the wanting of somebody else, you're acting immorally in this context. You see, this might seem absurd, but I think this is the reality we're facing today, that we are pushing interests further and further and further to demand more and more and more of those surrounding us. And in such a world in which we define morality in terms of interests, there is no legitimate way of standing back and saying, no, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to feel responsible for your interests. I actually don't want to be interested in you as a human being. I want to have a different locus of attention. And that's something that's by definition immoral in this kind of world. If you don't take everybody equally seriously and everybody's demands as equally binding, you are, by this definition that we have come up so far, acting in an immoral fashion, and you should feel guilty for it, right? And this can't be right. There must be something wrong with it. It just intuitively doesn't make sense, because it's something that nobody can live up to. You can't, just as you can't live up to the expectations of third-person reality and all the demands that are there, just as you can't know about everything, and you shouldn't feel guilty for not being able to know about everything. In the very same way, you can't live up to all first-person demands that are put up on you by the world surrounding you. They are endless, and they're in endlessly many different dimensions. We're not talking about here the actual harm of an individual. We're talking about the fact that even small things, like you have somebody who wants to learn something and you're a teacher, and the learning interest in the student is already something that creates a moral demand on you as a teacher. So you are acting immorally by not taking the student's interest of learning seriously, but just by being there to, I don't know, make a living, but not being interested in teaching. In doing that, you already act immorally. And see where we ended up. We ended up in a form of morality which is like, it is hyper sharpened and hyper demanding, because any form of interest, and again, we're not only talking about existential interests here, any form of interest can actually create legitimate moral demands upon others. So there is no way of unhinging and bracketing, if you want, limiting moral demands anymore. Everything becomes endlessly swallowing you up and taking you in. And if you want, you start living in a world which is, it is a world in which you can't go to bed knowing that you have done the right thing, right? The pre-modern version of morality is that since morality is God-given, there's one right thing to do, and if you do the right thing, even if that thing is to kill somebody else, you can then go to bed and feel good about it. You can go to bed and sleep well, knowing you have done the right thing, even if that thing was a horrible thing to do. This is gone, right? This conception of morality is gone with modernity, where again, interests constitute obligations. You can't go to bed knowing that you've done the right thing and sleep well. It's just not possible, because you can never live up to the expectations and demands surrounding you. Not even to the expectations and demands coming from your children. You can never feed them all. You will always fail in so many different regards, constantly. It's just not possible to go to bed and say, oh, I've done the right thing. So we've basically found ourselves in the very uncomfortable situation that we initially thought, well, without a reference to some higher being or some metaphysical reality, we can't ground morality. Well, we can ground morality, but the uncomfortable situation we came up with is that the way we've now grounded morality is so hyper sharpened and hyper demanding that no one can live up to its expectation. It has become a nightmare. It is something that's really, the moment you start being interested in first-person reality, it starts swallowing you up. It's endless. It is a little bit like psychotherapy. Like you start, you open up a small issue, and then it becomes an endless, whole of constantly new topics and issues that you have to work on without ever having hope of finding a meaningful sense of closure, right? And this is a very uncomfortable reality. I don't think it's just theoretical. I think this is the reality we're living in today, where for most of us, I think we intuitively ground morality in the recognition of others and other beings, so we extend it to include animals. But at the same time, we don't have a working mechanism with which we can isolate ourselves from certain demands in a reasonable way and say, I truly don't want to know, and I don't want to be involved with certain things. And the other aspect of this definition of morality, by the way, of course, is the entertainment industry, which basically works with this intuition and tries to lure you into caring about things that you don't really want to care about. It basically works with this, again, foundational intuition that human beings are responsive to moral demands being put on them. So when somebody else, hey, you should, puts to you, you should do this and that, and I want you to do this and that, we usually don't respond with full ignorance, but we're responsive to first person demands. And this is exactly what a huge part of our industry is built around. It's constantly bombarding us with first person demands, knowing that as human beings, we will respond to many of those and pay attention to them and invest our attention in it. So I think those areas are connected. Our conceptions of morality and the way we pay attention to reality are related to each other. And we find ourselves in a very uncomfortable situation here. Again, not that we're incapable of grounding morality or meaningful moral statements about reality, but in this way of framing moral facts, we've basically lost meaningful ways of saying no and distancing ourselves, right? And that's become basically captured by powers that are outside of our reach, powers that dictate the way we pay attention to reality without us having really agency over all of that. And it's happening to us. And so we have to rethink that. We have to rethink the way we think about morally binding issues and how agency is involved in this, and how you can get to a point where you can distance yourself from moral demands being put on you.